even that, if you read all of Galatians 5, Paul says, keep in step with the Spirit. Ephesians, that passage just mentioned to you about loving your wife as Christ of the church, actually starts off with, don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. The context is always being filled with the Spirit. None of God's commands are possible without His Spirit. Which I think is really neat. And people go, well, and then we talk about, so could we look at the life of Christ? Well, Jesus, He was just Jesus. Yeah, but it's interesting. Jesus Himself says, I can only do what the Father tells me. I can only do what the Father shows me. There's only two reasons that Jesus came to earth. The most obvious one that we readily think of is in Mark 10:45. He gave His life as a ransom for many. He paid the price for our sin. But the other part, same verse, not to be served, but to serve. And I think it's a reasonable substitution to say, to show us how to live, to serve, to set an example. So everything Jesus did fits into one of those two things, I believe. Either He's paying the price for our sin, and or He's showing us how to live. So, what if we looked at it through His eyes? How did Jesus deal with people? And with that idea, that second purpose of Christ comes this. If Jesus came to die as a ransom for many, that means I'm in the boat with Him, with everybody else on the planet. That means everybody in the world, whoever has lived, will live, gonna live, whatever, fits into one of these two categories. They are either redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ, or they are desperately in need of that. Either or. And when I start to set apart Christ as Lord, I start to remember that. I start to remember those moments that, with clarity, the Spirit reminds me how much I need Him. What a shift. It's a whole lot harder to scream and yell at somebody uncompassionately and unmercifully when I remember what God has set me free from. Sorry. And so, I also start to realize this. We all have the same disease, but just different symptoms. The problem is, we are flawed and we need Jesus. I don't know if any of you like House. I'm a House fan, sometimes more than others. Although, as I've alluded to, since my home is constantly who's going to cry now, I usually miss all the details of what's going on, and I'm like, what happened? But if you watch the show House, it goes something like this. Someone comes in really sick, they don't know why. We solved it, they start to get better, but then they get worse again. So then they come up with another idea, and like, there's like 8 solutions, and you're like, I know it's not the right one. How do you know? Because you went to medical school? No, it's 7:32. Like, there's 30 minutes left, right? Okay? So, finally, at 7:58, they found out that it's because a rare Botswanan beetle was somehow in their house because of a trip they took to Europe, where someone from, it's just crazy, right? Now, spiritually speaking, we can save ourselves a spiritual episode of House. We can look at all the behaviors, but it all comes down to this. We desperately want to know that we are loved, and we desperately and that need can only be filled by God. 16-year-old girl sleeping around needs to know she's loved. 21-year-old guy who's excited, going to take the business world by storm and runs over whoever he needs to get his job, needs to be loved. He doesn't feel validated, so he does something on the outside to look at it. Same point, which is interesting. Bullies just need to be loved. No, they don't. They're jerks. Yeah, they do. Doesn't make it any easier with the bullying, but that's the case. And so, spiritually, when I set apart Christ as Lord, I start to realize or remember my own need and realize that everyone's in that same boat. And so then again I go, man, okay, I get that. I wish I had a better example of how to share my faith. If only somebody had ever lived a perfect life that I could watch. Oh wait, here we go back to Jesus, okay? And I was talking with a friend of mine who teaches at Parkview, and he said, I think our problem sometimes is that we've become Paulist and not Christians. And what he meant was, sometimes we jump to the letters of Paul. Don't be wrong, it's God's holy word. It is ordained, it is perfect, it is without flaw. I'm not saying that. But I was like, I sometimes know a whole lot more about what Paul wrote than what the life Jesus lived. As a Bible teacher, sometimes I'll ask my students, what was the main idea of Jesus' teaching? And they're good little Parkview Baptist kids, and they've been in Bible class forever. And so I get tons of really great super spiritual answers to tell us that we need Jesus. so that we can, the main teaching that Jesus did was that we should ask Him into our hearts. Interestingly enough, Jesus never said that. Now, that is a true statement. We do need Jesus in our hearts. But what did Jesus actually do? What did He say? Do we even know? We know, I would say a lot about the cross, but if we do a lot about the cross, if I knew as much about the cross as I thought I did, I think I would live differently. But what about the things He lived? And so this idea of sharing our faith and needing example brings me to John chapter 4, if you want to flip there. John chapter 4, pretty familiar passage. Jesus and the woman at the well. Keep in mind, we're trying to figure out how can we be the church that was called to be witnesses everywhere. And how do we do that with gentleness and respect, but still say some of the hard things we need to say? And I love this story of Jesus and the woman at the well because we see Him actually doing it. So in John chapter 4, we're just going to look at this in a few verses at a time. In John chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, it says, the Pharisees heard Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized but His disciples. When the Lord learned of this, He left Judea and went once more to Galilee. Now He had to go through Samaria. So He came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, whatever, I'm not even that word, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as He was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour, so it's about noon. I love that Jesus got tired. It just kind of reminds us that He was indeed like us. It's noon, I've been up since 6 a.m., I've been walking, I'm tired. But I want to look at, just point out one quick thing in those 6 verses, and we'll keep going with the rest of the story. Jesus had to go through Samaria. If you know anything about, and many of you do, Jews and Samaritans, they didn't like each other. If I had a map, you would see that Samaria was indeed, in fact, right smack dab in the middle of where Jesus was going. But it was a regular practice by Jews to go all the way around Samaria. In our terms, it'd be like if you had to go to Lake Charles and you went to Alexandria and then back down instead of going through Lafayette. You can think about that. If Acadiana represents Samaria, so you made a 2-hour trip, I don't know, 4-hour trip, maybe 3.5 if you drive really, really fast, but not in Hot Springs because they ticket people like it ain't no one for this. Never found out from first experience, just laugh at the people who do. But if you think about that, so Jesus had to go to Samaria? Not really. People went around it all the time. Was it annoying? Yes. Was it possible? Yeah. But then I come back to this. Jesus said He only did what the Father showed Him. If the Father showed Him to go to Samaria, you're right. He had to go to Samaria. I was talking with a friend yesterday. His name is Andrew Hunter. He's a band director at Louisiana College in Pineville. And we were talking, and he has a 17-year-old boy that is living in his home with him. He has 2 small, he's about my age, so he's not old enough to have a 17-year-old kid, but he does. And we were talking about it, and I go, well, what do people say when they find out you have a 17-year-old kid living with you? And he said, well, people are like, I don't know how you do that. He's like, I don't think you understand. I had to do that. And they usually go, what do you had to take in a troubled high school kid to live with you? Yes, I did. What do you mean? What I mean is 2 months before I ever met this kid, my wife and I were talking, and she goes, I think we really need to get that 3rd bedroom in our house fixed up. Okay, whatever. No. They start talking. No, I really feel like the Lord is telling us to get that room ready, because I think someone's going to come stay with us. At the time, they didn't know if it'd be a missionary or nothing. 2 months later, Andrew meets this boy. He had to go to Samaria. You know what I'm saying? He's like, having this kid live with me was not an option. Jesus commanded to do it, which we keep coming back to always set apart Christ as Lord. That Jesus had to go to Samaria. Why? Because He stayed attached to the Father. That's what the Father said. That's what He did. He was where He was supposed to be. That right there seems to solve so many problems, but I'll rant into a teacher discipline talk if I go there. So Jesus was there because He had to be, because He's being obedient. If we keep reading, starting in verse 7, it says, a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? Because His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew,